Good morning, everyone. This is Diman Chaudhary from Agema Systems. Agema is a white box supplier. We provide different kinds of products, open networking switching products, starting from 10 gig to 100 gig, and we also have deep buffer switch. Today, I'll talk about Broadview, which is an open source code from Broadcom's contributed Broadview to open source community, and Broadview provide different aspects of network visibility. And today I will talk about monitoring switch performance using Broadview. Of course, Broadview has two components to it. So I'm talking about Agema Broadview, which is in our switch, and another aspect of Broadview, which is Broadview applications that resides on ODL, Open Daylight Controller, or you could put it the same thing on OpenStack. And those applications readily available from open source GitHub. Uh, so you could try collecting open source code from GitHub, and you can implement in your Open Daylight or OpenStack environment. Having said that, let's go through it. Network monitoring is critical functions needed in all network environments today. Uh, why you need that? You need it for different functionalities, accounting, logging, user activities that you want to log. That purpose, you need it. You need to monitor the network. There are several aspects of network monitoring, for example, bandwidth, traffic uses, and so on and so forth. Network optimizations, such as load balancing. If you want to do load balancing, you want to understand where conditions are occurring and how to overcome those kind of scenarios. And debugging through packet traces. You could debug certain packets if you feel that particular packet or flows, in fact, causing some network issues. Also, if you would like to enforce security compliance, you definitely need network visibilities. So what Broadview does is that I will just summarize in three dimensions or aspects of Broadview functionalities. One is data analysis, and another is actionable insights and ASIC level tracing and monitoring. What the data analysis is, that it's a simplified collections of data from port level, buffer level, and so on and so forth. And then you do the monitoring of traffic once you collect that data. Actionable insights are that, let's say you find an issue while you are monitoring network data, and you wanted to use some sorts of intervention and to, for example, if a network has been congested, you would like to eliminate that congestions, you could use certain level of flow control from Open Daylight perhaps, and push it down to the switches and redirect the traffic. So those actionable insights you could use a Broadview for. And also, as I mentioned earlier, that you could use ASIC level tracing and monitoring. For example, you could get into the Trident 2, Broadcom Trident 2, Tomahawk, Qumran, those kind of chipsets, and collect the information from MMU. MMU is a subsystem within the switching chips, and you could collect various different utilization parameters from there on. So having said that, if you have any questions, you could either talk about, you could just use your microphone and ask me that question as I go through the slide deck. Or you could send me email or chat online as I go through the slide deck, or afterwards as well. So I talked about Broadview, and from Agema's perspective, Agema switching open networking platform perspective, we are supporting 4 products for Broadview. AG7648, which is a 48 port 10 gig TOR switch. It does support 2 network operating systems. One is Agema OS, another is a Ocnos. Ocnos is from IP Infusions. Nonetheless, Broadview is supported in Agema OS as an agent to the switch. And if you have the Broadview apps from GitHub, you could implement Broadview apps to open Daylight and monitor the switch that way. What is the benefit of doing so? Because those TORs, these white boxes, will reduce your CapEx and OpEx for network configuration and network implementations. And you get the Broadview agent along with it, and you could do monitoring of your network. Otherwise, for network visibility applications, you have to pay much money, and you don't need to do that when you have this kind of offerings available from white box vendors such as Agema Systems. So the next product that we do support Broadview on is 8032, which is a 32 port 40 gig TOR switch. And of course, that one also have Agema OS and Ocnos on that. We have a 100 gig product, which is 32 port 100 gig switch, which also support Agema OS and Ocnos, and Broadview is supported on Agema OS. HEC7648 is a 48 port deep buffer 10 gig switch, and deep buffer switches has certain capabilities that you would like to deploy in a scenario where the congestions are occurring. This particular switch offers you 6 gigabyte of memory dynamically allocated to the port, so that gives you very good capabilities to eliminate network congestions and do the buffering as required for packet transport in the network. So how Broadview is deployed, or you will deploy a Broadview using Agema platform or Agema OS. So Broadview will reside, agent will reside on Agema OS in Agema's networking platforms. And as I mentioned, you will use Broadview apps on OpenDeployment or OpenStack, and then connect through if it is on OpenStack, you could use OpenStack ML2 ODL ML2 plugin to OpenStack and connect through ODL to the Agema switch. If the Broadview apps is on OpenDaylight, you could certainly use OpenFlow to connect to OpenDaylight and use Agema switch connectivity and monitoring that way. It's not necessary to use OpenFlow, but having OpenFlow will provide your control or network control or the capabilities to do certain network controls, flow redirections, and so on and so forth. So that's a benefit using OpenFlow. So the way, the architectural perspective, if we have to look at how Broadview is deployed and how it can able to take benefit of using Broadview applications on it. It's in this slide, I'm talking about the internal aspect of how Broadview has been deployed in Agema OS. So in this stack, you see the chips. So imagine it's probably Broadcom's Trident 2. And if, of course, Broadview only supports Broadcom's chipsets, so you have to use Broadcom's networking chipsets. So the chips, Broadcom's, for this demo, actually, I'm experimenting with the Trident 2, and the next level I would be using Tomahawk. But Trident 2, for example, you could put SDK on top of it, and then you use OpenNSL, which is providing APIs, and Broadview Instrument interacts with OpenNSL, and Broadview Instrument resides on the Agema OS NOS. And all you need to do is go to the CLI prompt and start your Broadview applications, Broadview agent, and it's ready. And then you could turn on OpenFlow and connect with OpenDaylight. And we'll talk about how to implement Broadview apps in OpenDaylight as well. Going back to when we talked about what Broadview does, how it collects the information from TOR switches. Here, what I'm trying to do in this slide deck is give you a kind of a brief overview of how packet comes into the switch and it passes through the Trident 2 chipset. Trident 2 is an example. You could use other Broadcom Tomahawk or Command platform to understand how these things works. So, excuse me. So what you are looking at here is that packet is coming in. It's going into Trident 2 chipset. And depending upon how you program the chipsets, it will go through the ingress pipeline. Ingress pipeline, I just briefed it over here. There are several subcomponents to it. Ingress pipeline, the packet will come to the parser, and then it will go through the lookup engines, and it will then end up in MMU buffer, and MMU, which is memory management unit or memory management subsystems, you could say. And the MMU has a different subset or subsystems to it: buffer, queue, schedule, and so on and so forth. I just briefed it, so need not to show you the nitty-gritty aspect of MMU, but to give you a brief overview of what MMU includes. And then once the packet passes through the MMU, it goes to the parser. Again, egress pipeline and other egress operational subsystems, and then comes out of the port. So for the example that I would be talking about, it's Broadview application. In this kind of particular example, is Broadview application will collect the information from MMU, from inside the Broadcom's Trident 2 Tomahawk chipsets. And MMU would be, just keep it in mind, it would be used as a reference point for you to understand how Broadview is collecting data. So how do you implement or configure Broadview in Agema switch and OpenDaylight? And it's simple. Step one, you log into Agema switch and you turn on Broadview agent, and then you configure OpenFlow. OpenFlow configuration is simple. It's simple instructions that OpenFlow controller, IP address, and the port, and then the type of protocol you are using, TCP or SSL. And once you have configured the switch, the next level would be that you go and turn on your OpenDaylight. So the current version of Broadview is supported on Helium SR3 OpenDaylight. So you prepare your OpenDaylight. Of course, you need Java as JDK 1.7. Version, and assuming that you do have that and you have downloaded ODL Helium SR3, you prepare that and you run the /curl from bin directory of ODL Helium SR3. And then you, of course, I presume that you have downloaded Broadview apps from GitHub, and then you install Broadview apps. And then once you in the OpenDaylight prompt, you just load ODL-Broadview all, and it will load Deluxe. And Deluxe is an interface for web-based access to OpenDelight. So it will include several modules along with Broadview. So you'll see that it's taking a little bit of time. Be patient, and it will come to a prompt. And once it has done, it might take 5 minutes or more. You need to have network connections, definitely access to the internet for the module to be properly loaded, modules to be properly loaded. And so here I'm showing you a simplified way of how you can prepare your OpenDelight and install Broadview application on top of it, and how you would browse OpenDelight. Remember that Deluxe actually is a web interface, and here for Helium you need to use IP address colon 8181 deluxe slash open slash index.html. But later versions of OpenDelight, for example Beryllium and so on and so forth, you may not need to put a deluxe in between. So it could be IP address colon 8181 and then slash index.html. That's how you could implement OpenDelight. So I would recommend, and I have used the various different version of Linux, I would recommend that you use 1404 Ubuntu L1404 LTS, and you install Java on that, as I mentioned to you. And then download Helium Assert3 on Ubuntu 1404. Start the .conf, load Deluxe OpenFlow and Broadview modules, but with the Broadview dash all modules actually load everything. So you don't need to separately load other modules. So once it's done, you could browse. Here I'm showing you could browse to your Helium Assert3, and you can able to see Broadview GUI, right? Within the GUI, Broadview will give you capabilities to add switch. One thing to note that when you are adding the switch, you see here that it's showing IP addresses, and then I'm using a private IP address. You could, you do not need OpenFlow in turn for you to add Broadview switches, because it's using direct connectivity using IP address. But having OpenFlow is important, because that way you could able to control certain flows, or you may use certain wildcard matching when the network congestion occurs to redirect the flow in other path. So here you configure your switch, and the switch, actually the port number that you should be using is 8080 and not 9070 is shown over here. So the next thing that you need to do, once you have configured the switch, you'll see the switch comes as shown here, and then you click on graph icons right next to the switch, and that will bring you to another screen where you can configure the statistics. Now look at here, the statistics, that's a pull down menu that is shown. You see that it's talking about egress service pole, egress MCQ, ingress port, and so on and so forth. So go back to the slide deck. I talked about the MMU aspect and ingress pipeline and egress pipeline. You could refer that one and imagine that when it talks about ingress, it's ingress pipeline aspect of it. And when it talks about ingress queues and egress queues, these are all different aspects within the MMU from ingress side and egress side. So referring to the earlier slide deck will give you an understanding how to collect the information and where you are collecting the statistics informations and so on and so forth. Another thing I'll suggest that before you start monitoring, you read through Broadcom's Trident 2, Tomahawk, Qumran, and so on and so forth, their data sheets. And so that if you can able to collect more information about those chips, it will give you capabilities to understand what are that from MMU perspective, what are the possibilities, what are the buffer statistics you can able to collect. And so that idea, that abstractions or that understanding you could use here when you are configuring Broadview. So here is an example. Once you have configured the Broadview, you could pump in the traffic. What I'm doing is actually I have Axia's two-port pumping into one port and creating congestions. And I'm collecting that data from the memory and seeing what's going on. And I'm using that kind of network scenarios and that kind of testing in my 10 gig. So just to give you an example, in my next series of slides, I will really go through different kinds of testing that you could possibly do using Agema switches and Broadview in your network scenarios and the problems you could solve. And I'll have live demos. So follow me back. You'll see some announcement soon that I'm going to do another Google Hangout on air, and probably by end of October or maybe middle of October, I'll send out an invite and please join me. That time I'll go live, and hopefully you will like what you see. So why you should be using Broadview? So going back to data analysis use case scenarios, there are cases where in a data center you will see, or even for in telco environment, in a card telco environment, you will see certain scenarios where for a particular fractions of second, let's say 100 microseconds, you'll see huge burst coming through the switch, and switch by default, unless it's a deep buffer switch, it does not have that much buffering. 12 meg would be per port, for example, and also being shared. And that kind of scenario is first come, first serve. So when high burst comes in, it will fill out the buffer, and then the following any other packets comes in may get lost. So what does it means for your network? For that durations, your application performance may degrade, right? You may lose some TCP packet, and as a result, TCP retransmission need to happen. A scenario where you are using Hadoop or that kind of environment, parent-child configurations, there are certain configurations or packet transport in certain configuration. You use TCP manycast type of packet transport, and as a result, depending upon where the parent server resides, that kind of scenarios happen when the burst TCP burst is sent out through the switch, and some of them will not reach to the child server, and your application will degrade. This is just an example. TCP Anycast is one example, but there are several examples where you'll see this kind of issues. And some of the mega data center try to resolve this issue using redirections of traffic or using deep buffer switches. But here with the regular TOR from Agema systems, you could able to monitor that kind of scenario. You could able to intervene, as I mentioned, through actionable insights, and redirect the traffic and solve the problem where if you are not using deep buffer switch, or if you are using standard switches, then you could resolve, assuming that your traffic is good enough to fill 10 gig or 40 gig or 100 gig pipeline. So we talked about ASIC level tracing and monitoring from MMU perspective. BST is buffer statistics collections, is a good way of collecting that that informations. And here is an example how you can able to collect that. Going back to our discussion about actionable insights. So let's take a use case scenario in your data center. In a certain situation, you may find that black hole occurs. So black hole, what it is that let's say you have group of servers sending packet to each other in a spine leaf loop configurations, and the packet comes in, and let's say here packet is going from H1 to H5, and somehow something happened in networks, and the packet, instead of going into H5, it's going back to the spine switches and ending up in a loop, and packet will reside there until TTL, time to live field, whatever the parameters in there expires. In that scenarios, it's just one example, one in the hundreds of millions of packets ends up like that. You have a situation which is called a black hole, and that black hole scenarios, you need to intervene. Otherwise, your application performance started to degrade. You're going to have data center disaster, I presume, depending upon how disastrous situation it is. But this is just an example, and to eliminate that packet from looping in your spine, in your spinal leaf architectures, you use Broadview to configure certain way so that it eliminates, it can detect that scenario and eliminate packet from looping in the networks. There are so many other features, but I'll just keep it brief and summarize this. We talked about three different aspects of Broadview. There are other scenarios where you may seen some flows coming in and congesting the network, and you want to trace out what kind of flows are doing it. So you can take particular flows and inject a trace packet and see how things are working in there, and monitor that way. So you could, as I mentioned, there are so many other features, but trace profile is another feature that very important. You may want to use that kind of features for your network diagnostic. Having said that, I reached the end of this presentation. This was a brief introduction to Broadview and Agema product, how the Broadviews are implemented in Agema product, how it's working. Next, when I present my next Broadview broadcast, I would like wide participation from audience, and I will demo in network scenarios and live demo on how I'm collecting data using Exia and collecting data from MMUs and so on and so forth. So you will see a live demo going on. Having said that, thank you for your participations, and I really appreciate your taking the time to listening to this live broadcast. Thank you all. Bye. Unless you have a questions, I'm just canceling this broadcast for now. Thank you. Bye.